Introducing the class of 1685, the composers born this year were to shape the sound of Western music forever. J.S. Bach, whose divine counterpoint became the gold standard for musical logic. Handel, who would lay the foundations of operatic grandeur. And then there was Scarlatti.
He is not interested in being pedantic, in coming back to the motivic materials so that we can analyze them based on these very tightly woven motifs. He really doesn't care. He is writing music that is free, that is spontaneous, and is just exploding with creativity.
He wasn't to become the face of the Baroque like Bach, nor did he pioneer a grand form like Handel. But Scarlatti did something equally marvelous. He wrote music that sounds as daring today as the day that it was first performed.
At the time, it must have sounded completely crazy. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine how people would have perceived some of those pieces when they were performed.
And the best part for us is that he did this almost exclusively writing for the keyboard. That's right. Scarlatti isn't famous for orchestral suites, grand operas, or oratorios. Instead, he wrote solo keyboard sonatas, at least 555 of them, most of them in one movement, and most of them just a few minutes long. But listen closely and you'll hear the unmistakable voice of a cosmopolitan genius who dared to do things in his music that no other composer of the time dared to do.
Let's not make a mistake of thinking of Scarlatti as this Italian, cappuccino and pasta composer. No, here we have the whole world of music within these sonatas.
Scarlatti filled his sonatas with reckless leaps, Spanish guitar strumming, and harmonies that would confound editors and performers for centuries. And yet, these tiny little sonatas have led to some of the most iconic performances in piano history. Argerich.
I just started laughing because I'd never seen fingers like that before in my life.
Michelangeli.
Anyone who has tried to study some Scarlatti has found this video. When I finally went about learning it on my own, it was very hard to get out of Michelangeli's interpretation because it was already quasi-internalized.
Horowitz.
I remember the moment where I discovered the recording of Scarlatti sonatas by Horowitz, and it really felt like being struck by lightning. The beauty, the clarity of it. It really felt like I was looking at the starlit sky and every star was just perfect and shiny and every note was round and delightful and full of life.
But for a long time, many people didn't really know what to make of Scarlatti's music. I mean, most people didn't even know that Scarlatti's music existed at all. Most of his works weren't even published until the early 1900s, which meant that performers, listeners, and composers went centuries without hearing Scarlatti's work. It wasn't until the quintessential work of the musicologist and harpsichordist Ralph Kirkpatrick, who reorganized and re-edited the sonatas in 1953, that the world really saw what Scarlatti had up his sleeve this whole time. Then there's the question of how to deal with these pieces in the present day. What is their place on a concert program, and how far is too far for an interpretation to go?
These are true gems and they really should take a central place in a program.
Despite being born in the same year, does he really deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as Bach and Handel?
Scarlatti should be credited with exploring the harpsichord keyboard idiom to the maximum, the same way that Chopin and Liszt are credited with exploring the piano idiom in their time.
This is Magdalena Stern-Baczewska, a wonderful pianist and harpsichordist who's on faculty at Columbia University and who has spent extensive time playing the music of Domenico Scarlatti. I also spoke with Jeff Brown, an editor at Van magazine and freelance journalist covering classical music and culture issues. He recently wrote about his controversial journey listening to every single Scarlatti sonata.
If someone recorded all this, someone else should probably listen to all this.
I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and today, with Jeff and Magdalena's help, we're going to get a new perspective on the Italian master and find out what makes him so unique. We're going to take a little tour through the countries where Scarlatti lived, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, in order to understand who Scarlatti really was, what is his purpose in a contemporary concert program, and how to listen and interpret his works as pianists and piano lovers. So grab your passport, your neck pillow, and let's get going. Scarlatti's globe-trotting story begins in 1685, when he was born in Naples, a city that would set the stage for his fiercely independent style as a composer.
And Naples was not the Naples that we think of today as a part of Italy. It was the Kingdom of Naples. So it was a very independent state with, and to this day, it has its own dialect. It is its own universe.
That independence left quite an impression on the young Domenico. Born into a prolific and quite famous musical family, he himself was a prodigious keyboardist, getting his first job as an organist at the age of only 15.
He was an extremely proficient keyboardist, and there's even a legendary duel between him and Friedrich Handel. The two of them both being very accomplished, they had like a kind of competition against each other, and I think the final verdict was that Scarlatti won playing on cembalo and Handel won playing on an organ. So they were pretty evenly at the same level, but Scarlatti really, he had the edge over keyboard technique.
But he was also living in the shadow of his father Alessandro Scarlatti, a master of opera and oratorio, who was one of Italy's greatest composers at the time. If Domenico wanted to stand out, he would have to do something radically different. Domenico moved to Venice in 1705, a musical crossroads which was full of inspiration for the young and creatively hungry composer.
Venice was an international trading hub, right? An important center for trading goods between the East and the West. And the music you're hearing in Venice is really of the entire world. You're going to hear Arab music, Eastern music. Vivaldi was alive at the time.
In 1709, Scarlatti took over his father's position in Rome, working for the Queen Maria of Poland, who was exiled and living there at the time, thus moving from the incredible musical melange of Venice to the center of academic music in Rome. He quickly scored a job working at the Vatican, where he honed his skills as a master of counterpoint, building on the city's great traditions of polyphony. Rome was a city of rules, but Scarlatti wasn't interested in becoming Palestrina 2.0. Instead, the academic rigor of counterpoint, form, and harmony which Scarlatti mastered while working at the Vatican became the foundation upon which he built his radical new language. Most of Scarlatti's keyboard sonatas were written after he left Italy, but we still hear all of these inspirations in his later works. For example, we can hear an irreverent nod to Renaissance polyphony in his Sonata K87.
The melodic lines are weaving in the most vocal fashion here, and this is, we can say, a black sheep among already this unbelievable variety of Scarlatti sonatas. And here we are hearing certainly an homage to the Renaissance polyphony. And as vocal as it is, there are these cadences or motifs that like to go around and around like a plane sort of cruising over the landing strip. And this is not something that Palestrina would have done, right?
Scarlatti's job at the Vatican was extremely exhausting and demanding. There's evidence that he wrote quite a lot of music at this time, which has been unfortunately lost. But it certainly predicts just how prolific Scarlatti was to become and how unquenchable his font of ideas really was.
Scarlatti literally has ideas to burn. Very rarely does Scarlatti return to these great tunes that he came up with at the beginning of the sonata. It's almost wasteful, right? How could you not reuse these wonderful melodies? Many of them are so catchy, so delicious and delightfully disjunct, and would make for a wonderful melody to weave throughout the piece, but Scarlatti does not do that.
I feel like the pure number of times he tried to do this piano sonata, trying not to be bored himself, led him to take some crazy risks at some points. That's probably where you ended up with the stuff that sounds like a bit like Debussy or John Adams to me.
The prodigality of material often gives the impression that a Scarlatti sonata is being made in the presence of the beholder.
In 1720, Scarlatti made a choice that would change everything. He moved from Rome to Lisbon. Portugal's royal family needed a new music director, and Scarlatti needed an escape from the strict compositional restrictions of his job and from the pressure of his esteemed family. It was in Portugal that the Scarlatti that we know today really began to emerge. Lisbon had no opera, so Scarlatti began focusing pretty much exclusively on writing keyboard works. His most important muse was the Princess Maria Barbara. Maria Barbara wasn't just a student, she was a catalyst for the development of Scarlatti's compositional voice. She wasn't just a princess, but an incredibly skilled keyboard player as well. In Lisbon, Scarlatti had something he never had before: unlimited time, resources, and audiences who were interested in his music. It's a recipe for success. A diabolically good keyboardist writing for incredibly good keyboardists like Maria Barbara and the King of Portugal's younger brother, Dom Antonio, with unlimited resources to devote himself to composing, as well as very few restrictions on what he had to do. Unlike his contemporaries Bach and Handel, Scarlatti was pretty much always working in a very independent format. It's no wonder that under these conditions, Scarlatti was able to produce the ultimately over 550 sonatas that he wrote, but such an output can feel quite overwhelming. I mean, how do we as performers deal with programming these works?
These are true gems, and they really should take a central place in a program.
Some of them are certainly more famous than others, and well, of course, with such a huge variety as 550, we have a lot of choices that we could make for our own programming.
And I think Kirkpatrick just says it all right here. The age is fortunately nearly past where 18th century composers were subject in concert programs to a kind of typecasting in which a few Scarlatti pieces or little couperins on the part of the more adventurous, Mozart sonata or a Bach organ fugue, were served up as well-styled appetizers to be regretted by latecomers and to act as finger warmers and curtain raisers to the really expressive music of the 19th century. That said, I am not completely crazy about the kind of encyclopedic approach to performing these sonatas, because it is really like eating an extremely well-prepared meal where everything is perfectly spiced and perfectly reduced. All the sauces are just excellent and the flavors are flowing. There's only as much of that as one can take with that feeling of freshness.
I'm not sure if they would all sound so special if you just played like the very best, all 20 or whatever in a row. Once you've got like 45 minutes of that, the brain starts to go, oh, another arpeggio, or oh, another minuet, another gavotte, whatever. I feel like you could probably go about it in two ways. One would be like Scarlatti, the kind of palate cleanser, the kind of normal, familiar stuff on a program that's getting very adventurous, or you could do it the other way around, where Scarlatti is the kind of like vinegary and strange stuff in a program of Baroque music that's more stately, more familiar.
I personally am a big fan of programming the music of Domenico Scarlatti with newer works, and by newer I mean actually by living composers.
Especially if you're a harpsichordist, you can really work with like contemporary music plus Scarlatti. Think of the Ligeti, a harpsichord piece, and other pieces that make the harpsichord sound just like really alien and strange. And I think if you choose the right Scarlatti sonatas, they could go well with that too.
In Portugal, Scarlatti continued his interest in the music that existed outside of the academy, outside of the courts. Scarlatti's interest in diverse kinds of music is something that was to become a really essential part of his work, and which was an inspiration to many composers in the 20th century, such as Bartok. And then Maria Barbara became the Queen of Spain, and where she went, Scarlatti followed. The first stop was Seville, where Scarlatti was surrounded by the incredibly interesting music of Andalusia.
Seville is the hub for flamenco, for the traditional music of Spain. And there he is hearing the strumming of the guitar, kind of an almost aggressive, one could say, strumming of the guitar, the so-called technique of rosqueado, where the chords sort of explode. And right here in K492, we have this. If you were not aware of where this music is born in Scarlatti's mind, you would interpret these grace notes as a typical cute grace note, right? But the moment you realize, oh, this must be flamenco chanting, wait a minute. Instead of making it graceful, it all of a sudden takes a life of its own, becoming a part of the chant.
Grace notes and ornaments aren't just decorative flourishes to make the music sound more interesting. They're incredibly important expressive techniques in Scarlatti's music, much like a singer's inflection or the tap of a dancer's foot. After Seville, Scarlatti moved with the royal family to Madrid, but he also traveled all around Spain, hearing an incredibly wide range of musical styles. And it's really important to remember this period of Scarlatti's life when we're approaching his music on the modern-day piano. Just think about how wild and how gruff the music sounds on the harpsichord. There's another element, which is the singing lines of Scarlatti's music, the illusion of phrasing that must be created even on a harpsichord or on the piano. Scarlatti became very good friends with the castrato singer Farinelli, and we can hear the voice of this incredibly skilled singer in Scarlatti's keyboard works.
Sonata 208, where Scarlatti actually writes adagio cantabile, meaning the music must communicate as speech, right? As something that will move the hearts of the listeners. I think this Sonata K208 is truly a wonderful expression of a castrato aria. So notice how he works with the rhythm, right? Nothing is ever square or on the beat. He is truly making this melodic line weave through as though we were listening to the greatest voice in the world. Vocally, this is so expressive to sing this disjunct line.
Interpreting Scarlatti requires a certain level of freedom. It's not about playing exactly what's on the page, but about bringing the music to life, bringing your audience with you on this journey through all of the musical places that Scarlatti is exploring.
There is an unbelievable amount of flavor and spice that I think if we try to be good and if we try to be literal about the notation, we're going to miss out on a lot of excitement.
Scarlatti's music provides so much room to play, and the most important thing is finding your individual voice. Even the most different interpretations still express an essential quality of the music. Scarlatti's long and prolific life ended in 1751 in Madrid, and for many centuries, he took his legacy with him. He was not at all a great influence over the composers who were to follow in the centuries after, and even composers who knew about his music weren't really necessarily huge fans. Schumann is just one example of this. Chopin, on the other hand, was ahead of his time, writing, "If I were not afraid of incurring disfavor of many fools, I would play Scarlatti in my concerts. There will come a time when Scarlatti will often be played in concerts and people will appreciate and enjoy him." But his legacy lives on through performers and scholars who have devoted themselves to his music. Remember Ralph Kirkpatrick, who we talked about earlier? He is really the person we have to thank for bringing Scarlatti into the limelight in the 20th century.
If you're ever going to read one book about Scarlatti's music, this is the book, the monograph from 1953 of Scarlatti by Ralph Kirkpatrick.
And honestly, we have barely scratched the surface of this incredible composer. There are 555 or more sonatas, and the best way to get to know them is simply to spend time with them yourself.
The beautiful thing about Scarlatti sonatas is that we have hundreds of them, literally. So there is no shortage. We don't have to follow any instructions as to which ones to choose. You just go through them and fall in love one by one. I do that regularly, and that's how I learned the new ones.
There's an immense joy in discovering these sonatas, and something magical about finding the ones that speak to you, finding the ones that work best in your hands and in your ears, and finding the ones that give you that sense of whimsy and of surprise.
I mean, I think as a curator of a concerts, as a performer, it's a really fantastic first step to just see where your free associations lead you between different pieces of music and different styles and all that kind of thing. And then to kind of work out those connections and see if you can make them more explicit through actual things in the material or in the score or in the general aesthetic approach.
It can be overwhelming. It can be perhaps even a maddening process, but one that's incredibly worthwhile when you find that jewel of a piece.
You know, us as a classical music industry, listeners, performers, we have a tendency to take out the best pieces that composers have done and then forget about the rest and finally say this was a genius who could do no wrong. And it was kind of nice just to perceive a obviously very talented musician like working his way towards things that were getting better and more interesting and more striking, more unusual.
I think that the music of Scarlatti is just a big, colorful party, right? I think holding back does us disservice. And does him disservice. It's really interesting how a man in his 50s is living such a vibrant life through music. And I think this is something that we can really all aspire to. Knowledge is power. You know, doing a little bit of reading, investing a little bit of time in doing that intellectual homework. I think that will really help anyone who's approaching this music take it off the page with the knowledge of the world of sound that Scarlatti lived in.
Scarlatti didn't just push boundaries, he smashed through them with both hands on the keyboard. His sonatas demand attention. They insist on being brought to life from the page to the performance, and are really rewarding for anyone willing to dive into them as listeners, as scholars, or as performers.
If there was one word that I would use to describe him, I would use the word fresh. I mean, everything he created, it just sounds otherworldly. It doesn't sound at all like it's coming from the Baroque era. It never sounds like he spent so much time in composing each piece. It almost sounds like they're just composed on the spot. They just appeared on this earth as is, and he almost didn't have to edit or do anything to enrich them. It's up to us to keep up with this spirit of having fun.
If you're interested in learning more about some specific Scarlatti sonatas, check out Tonebase Premium, where we have lessons on Scarlatti from Claire Huangci and Ben Lodi, and where new lessons by Magdalena Stern-Baczewska, who we heard from today, will be coming later this year. Tonebase is the platform that makes videos like this possible, and no matter where you are in your piano journey, there is something there for you. Not to mention that there's also quite a lot of information on Scarlatti's works for the guitar on the guitar side of Tonebase Premium, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check that out as well. And if you haven't yet, Please subscribe to the channel so that you can be the first to know when new content drops. We've got some great ideas coming up for 2025, and I'm really excited to share it all with you. Also, be sure to leave us a comment. What's your favorite performance of Scarlatti? What's your favorite Scarlatti sonata to play? We'd love to hear from you. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time.